Hi everyone, this is Dr. Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode. We have a guest today talking about bit fitting, Fiona Dearing. Bit fitting is something that I became aware of when I was teaching equine science, and I needed to teach the students a bit about bit fitting, so I did a bit of study in it and the importance around the anatomy and how it really opened my eyes to the variation of horses' mouths and how that really impacts, the way that bit fits in there. And just because they're a big horse, it doesn't mean that they need a bigger bit. So yeah, welcome to Fiona. Sophie will introduce her in a second, but how are you today, Soph?
I'm going really well. Like you said, this is a great conversation because it's one of the most universal pieces of tack. So it's something that everybody can learn about and take away to use with their own horses if you're using a bit, but also we'll be touching on the cons. Fiona has a few things to say about bitless as well. So there's something in here if you don't use a bit. Fiona, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I sure can. Thanks for having me on. I actually grew up in Tasmania and was the crazy horse mad kid that bugged my parents for a horse until they bought one for me that then promptly put my father's hip in quite a few pieces. So then they decided to hand it on to me. But I grew up doing all those horsey things and moved away to Sydney, was working in the music industry, and came down to Melbourne, and horses were always in still simmering away in the background. And then I started coaching again. A friend of mine became DC of a pony club and said, right, you can come out and coach, and decided that I really loved that. So I worked for quite a long time with women returning to riding, nervous riders, and providing what I hope was, really good service in that lower end, lower level riders. There are lots and lots of riders who can coach at the high end, but I really want to provide excellent value to those learning to ride as an adult, returning to riding after some time off. I've been a hero retrainer for Harness Racing Victoria for about 6 years, so the standees are a great love of mine, and love getting those guys going and sending them out into really super homes. And I still do a little bit of that now and then, but then about 5 or 6 years ago, I'd always been interested in bits, and I had the opportunity to do a bitting course and went down the rabbit hole, and I'm still going down the rabbit hole. So I've been working full-time as a bit fitter for about 5 years all around Victoria.
Yeah, it's such a valuable tool to have, and I think it goes really well with your coaching background, and then, being able to look at the way the horses are moving with the different bits. Can you just explain why do we use a bit?
Well, if you look back through artistic history, that's where we first see bits being used, way back in Mesopotamia and sort of what we'd consider the Middle East now. Art from that time depicts horses being ridden and driven in bits, and it was primarily a means of control at that point in time. And as the horse has evolved through history, We look through the Baroque period, and some of those bits then are super scary if you look at what's on the inside of them. And then the outside of them sort of reflects that time in history as well. They're very, very highly decorated, lots of engravings and lots of swirls and swivels and things. But if you look at it, actually, friends of mine have got a verified Viking bit. And the Viking bit, it's made of iron, but it is basically a single joint loose ring bit. It looks pretty much like any single joint loose ring bit you see. So in terms of bits having a mouthpiece and a cheekpiece, that sort of hasn't changed greatly. Horses, you know, we've sort of had those single joint bits and mullen mouth bits, and then probably, I guess, sort of the 60s was when we started getting three-pieced bits, the double jointed bits. And then the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a really big move in bits, in bitting materials and styles of bits. And I think that probably goes hand in hand as we've understood the horse's anatomy and how the horse moves and how important the tongue and the hyoid are to its function, so that we can help the horse travel better with a bit in its mouth.
Yeah, the tongue and the hyoid is definitely an area that I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
So, did you have a question?
Well, it's very interesting you mentioned that, you know, previously, you know, the real aim was acknowledged. We are trying to control the horse in what we're doing. And you do see in a lot of the paintings made, you know, from just a couple of few hundred years ago, so many of the paintings that you see, particularly in war spaces, horses always have a gaping mouth.
Yeah, they sure do.
I have one of those paintings, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, and they were painting those paintings, I suppose, just from the perspective of what do I see, not that there's any meaning behind it. Now we can derive, you know, possibly what was going on there. Now people tend to use bits for communication and direction, and there's some insanely soft, beautiful work that people can do, you know, with a finesse of a bit. What are some behaviors that indicate a bit doesn't work for a horse?
I guess the most obvious one would be the gaping mouth, as depicted in paintings. So, you know, obvious tongue activity, an excessive amount of saliva, which may indicate the horse is restricted and is unable to swallow comfortably. And then, you know, those are the sort of obvious outward things, but then there are the things like a horse backing off from a connection or hiding from a connection, or a horse boring down into a connection. Even off the horse, an unwillingness to accept the bridle because he can already knows that that's not going to be comfortable for him. An unwillingness to move forward, teeth grinding while you're riding. All of those things would be a sign that the horse may not be entirely comfortable in the bit. And along with that, we have to acknowledge that, you know, some of these behaviours aren't exclusively that of the bit. Bitting is very holistic, so we have to ensure that the horse is comfortable physically, and the saddle fit and farriery, dentistry, nutrition, all of those things. You know, a bit isn't going to change the horse's way of going if it's physically not comfortable in other areas.
Yeah, it was really interesting when I changed Jelly's bridle and to the bitless bridle. It's not even about going bitless in this situation, but his association with the bridle. So it was a bit tight through the headpiece, and he used to always reef as soon as I'd take up a little bit of tension on the bit, he'd just reef it out of my hands. And you know, it you know, I think it'd become a habit to do that because
Yeah.
he's expecting. But then on the day that I put the bitless bridle on him and it fitted his head and everything, the facial expression that he had, it was crazy. he went from kind of that resistance, like what you said, that bit of resistance to being bridled, and he's a really well-behaved horse.
Yeah.
I put the bitless bridle on him. His whole face softened. He closed his eyes and he just stood there, like, and then after a bit he licked and chewed, and it was so obvious that he was like, oh, this is a better place to be. And then recently I've kind of gone to a different bitless bridle, which he really likes. And yeah, there's just so much receptiveness in his response to that. And I don't have a bit in his mouth because he has body issues, canter struggles, and he's well enough behaved, also to
Mm.
less, and he just seems really happy and comfortable in it. So we can come back to bitless in a second, but I wanted to ask you, we've highlighted the discomfort signs. What about the comfort signs? What are we looking for with a horse that is comfortable with the bit?
It's interesting you mentioned those signs that your horses had, because people can often be quite probably skeptical of, how am I going to know? And I kind of go, oh no, you'll know. And it is some of that they just kind of take a big breath and go, okay, I'm fine. When you change bits, you do genuinely see things like the neck will lengthen, obviously the mouth will relax. I often look for just behind the saddle that goes softer, the back starts to swing, and they just might feel like they've got bigger underneath you, because if that tongue and hyoid, if that tongue and hyoid and TMJ have previously been restricted and then are able to relax, then literally the horse grows because the fascia is relaxed through them. So, they just start to swing. The changes I see, and usually I'm just like, oh, why didn't I video that horse going around in the bit before? And the owner's like, oh, we can put that on again. And I'm like, no, we can't. I can't do it to them again. But massive changes.
Yeah, I think I saw once I was watching like a clinic, and there was a horse in a gag, and the young girl had the connection to the bottom of the gag. And I've probably talked about this in the hyoid tongue podcast that we did. And so the connection was on the bottom of the gag. The horse was constantly, like, it looked like she had to hold the horse, right? It was really kind of dancing on the spot, and its stride length was really compromised and it couldn't hold a straight line. The professional rider got on, moved the attachment up to, I think, the snaffle attachment rather than the gag. And obviously better hands, anxious, less stressed about the situation. That horse's stride length increased by more than a foot.
Yeah.
Straight line, stopped dancing, relaxed. And, that just really, it was a good highlighter of the fact that when the horse is pulling and dancing around, often people will put a harsher bit on, but sometimes they're actually trying to say, I'm really uncomfortable. And it's not that you need a stronger bit. Often you actually need a softer bit.
Well, I'd say that in 90% of cases, I would bit down.
Yeah.
And I had a horse not that long ago, actually, that I changed his bit, and the owner and I were having a chat. She went out and had a ride, and then she came back and we had a chat, and she looked at me. She went, this is amazing. And I went, what do you mean? And she goes, he doesn't stand still. And he was standing still with a back leg cocked and half asleep. So, when they're more comfortable, they change because they don't have that cognitive ability to lie to us. When they feel better, they just go better. And it's the most amazing thing to see, I'm fortunate to get to see it most days. And and it kind of, I don't want it to sound like people are doing it wrong out there. They're not. Everyone's doing the best they can with the knowledge they have, and certainly if they've booked me to come to see them, they've realized that there might be something that they could do better. But just the changes are astounding. And particularly stride length, as you mentioned, that's one I sort of didn't include in there before, but you see horses start to track up and just cover ground and take less strides to get from one end of the arena to another, because they're just loose and they're not restricted in their body.
Yeah, like we have to understand that pressure on the tongue is really a braking pressure. And when you've been to a dissection with Sharon, and I've done lots of dissections, and it's amazing and I think what always blows students away in when I put the pressure on the tongue is how little pressure I can put on the tongue, because I'll go around and show them how much pressure, and it's literally my finger resting on the tongue, and how that changes their ability to move the hind leg. And I always want to see their faces go, because it's an awareness that when we're holding onto their mouth, let alone the bit comfort, how we're restricting their ability to engage that hind end. And
I couldn't believe that there was that real catch point. And it was fascinating watching other people, some who kind of just pushed through it, and I'm like, oh, okay. But you can feel that catch point, and of course adrenaline trumps everything with a horse. They will push through it, but they shouldn't have to.
Yeah, no, it's really important.
Yeah.
So Fiona, what aspects are important anatomically? Like what kind of structures in the mouth are going to influence your horse's bit fit?
Obviously I'm pretty interested in everything from that facial crest down. And I'm looking at the size of the tongue, the placement of the canine teeth in geldings, particularly when you start to look at double bridles, how far back that upper canine is in relation to the length of their smile. And then I check whether the hyoid, whether the TMJ will move freely, whether I can just occlude their teeth. And it's sort of at that point, if I'm not able to, because I'm not a qualified body worker, at that point I will note it and ask the owner to perhaps consult with their body worker on that. I'm not qualified to push through that area. And then the width and the covering on their bars or their lower jaw, they all sort of factor in. I also check for any wounds, which, to be honest, I see very few wounds on bars or lips. I can sometimes feel that the bars aren't even side to side. There may be some residual damage there. And often they could be even from a pullback injury. I'm also looking for any scarring or abnormalities on the tongue.
Yeah, I one of my clients' horses, she's competing at a high level in dressage, so she's not in a double bridle, she's still in a snaffle, but she's moving up the levels in the snaffle. But her horse has scarring, not from her, but from previous riding, in his lip. And I think because she picked it up, and he was, I think, hanging on that side, and so I actually worked on that scarring. It was quite thick.
Yeah.
Especially on one side of his, and he has a lot of pelvic.
It all transfers, right?
Yeah, like his pelvis, especially when she got him, he had like very limited function in his pelvis, but he was doing high level things. And so I'd say, there was a lot of pressure on his mouth because he couldn't engage his hind end. And so we've obviously been working with him on that aspect. But yeah, releasing the scar tissue in the corner of his mouth really helped him be more responsive. So it's an area that we definitely need to check on
Yeah.
our horses, and alleviate if it is a problem.
I'm actually wondering, in speaking of, things like that have popped up in the soft tissue, when you think about saddle fit, ideally, coming back to a saddle that fits the horse and also like rechecking the saddle as the horse develops, what does a schedule look like in terms of, a good routine for checking your bit fit? Do you ask to review the horse in the future, especially if you're seeing a horse who maybe has had a positive change in a session and you want to know how they're going in the future? What does that look like?
All my clients have the option to check back in with me, but generally your bitting will only need to change as you move up the levels. So a lot of horses, if they're going to stay around the same level with the same rider, may only need one bit fit in their life. Say the little white pony at Pony Club that isn't going to go above grade 5 or so because riders outgrow him. He's only going to need one bit fit for all his life. But if you're looking at a performance horse that's moving up through the levels, the bitting may well need to change as you're asking more challenging questions. So as that training becomes more specific and you're asking, at dressage, you're asking for more carry and sit. Jumping, you may be asking for, you're being asked for more challenging questions in between fences, and you just need a more nuanced conversation. That's when you would look at changing your bitting. For a horse that's going to maybe stay, your pleasure horse or lower level performance horses, they may well stay in a bit, the same bit for most of their life. But in terms of checking back in with me, it would be as you feel the conversation isn't as clear as you'd like, and you may need to change something. So it's certainly not like saddle fitting where you need to have it checked maybe annually or as the horse changes shape. It really is around the level of training and the conversation you're having with the horse.
And maybe the type of discipline, like if you change disciplines as well, going up the level in one discipline. But if you decide to go show jumping and you've had a bit for dressage, then you might also need a different bit for that situation.
Yeah, and often eventers, with eventing horses, I tend to try and keep the mouthpiece the same if they're comfortable in the mouthpiece, and just change up the cheek piece.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I want to talk about bitless bridles because that's definitely an area that I'm interested in, and I've tried a few different ones over the time. Like I've tried just attachments to the noseband, like side pull. I've tried the crossovers where they cross over under the chin, crossover at the top of the head. I've at the moment got jelly. I don't actually know what it's called, but I got it from the Netherlands years ago, and it's got a little bit of pole leverage as well as the nose. So it attaches to the cheek piece, and then it has a nose attachment and a chin attachment, and then the reins, I can kind of change the attachments, but there's leverage there. And since I put him in that, so I changed him from a straight side pull into that actually broke. It wasn't great when you're cantering. But this one I feel is much more stable, but it's so interesting because he is so much more responsive in this one. Like to the point that, backing up there's other things that I've been doing to help with this, but just his comfort has really improved. So what do you look at in terms of bitless bridle fitting and bitless bridle comfort?
I tend to prefer the side pulls, although I do quite like the sound of the one you've got. You have to send me a photo.
It's from the Netherlands,
I find that I tend to find the crossovers
confusing.
Well, A, confusing, and B, I don't know that they give the release because they're nylon or leather, there's not enough weight for there to be a quick enough or big enough release.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm happy to stand corrected on that if someone wants to.
Well, that's actually
Yeah.
why I tried it a couple of times, and that's actually why I didn't persist, because I'm like, it didn't release.
Yeah. And there are some really lovely side pulls around now also, which look like your normal dressage bridles. Pony Club Australia now allow bitless bridles. And I think there is quite a push for them to become, an option in other organisations and for other disciplines. But
pushing in HRCAV, because
yeah,
I can't compete. I can go and do dressage, bitless, but no, sorry, I can do show jumping bitless.
That's right. You can do the jumping.
I can't do dressage or obstacles. And I refuse. I don't need to put a bit back in Jelly's mouth. He's happy and comfortable, so why should I for my own gain? So I'm really pushing for that shift.
And just because I'm a bit fitter absolutely doesn't mean that I think every horse needs a bit. There are many situations where bitless, providing the combination, are safe and capable and trained for bitless, are able to do that. And I've got a client who's got a Grand Prix horse she bought, who arrived with a massive set of double bridle bits, and he was very reluctant to put them in his mouth, and we went through the process. We changed his bits and he did become a lot better. We had a very, very light set in him. And she rang me one day and went, hey, guess what? I just got on this horse and rode him with ye olde halter with the reins attached to the side of it, and had the best piaffe, piro and passage I've had. So he and I said, look, I think at this point we need to go further down the diagnostics path, which she did, and he had changes all through his hyoid and some dental issues, which is, sort of not to say that that's going to be the same in every horse that's been trained to that level, but I think that's also an interesting field of research to consider, where these horses are with their hyoid that have performed at elite levels for an extended period of time.
Definitely.
That is a very isolated case, but it'd be interesting to know whether there are changes in other horses' hyoids at that level.
Yeah, hyoids and TMJ.
Yeah.
Definitely. So when you're looking at the bitless fit, what are some kind of key areas that you are looking for a good, good bitless fit? Like how someone's bought a bitless bridle and they're like, how do I know?
Yeah, we obviously want to have all the considerations that we would have with a normal bridle, that we've got good clearance around the ears, that the brow band's not too tight. A lot of my time is spent saying go and buy a bigger brow band, just so that those ears have that ability to move and there's no pressure on the TMJ. We want and with your cavesson, we want it to sit that 2 fingers below the facial crest, like we would fit a normal ridden bitted bridle cavesson, and then just having it snug enough so that it's not going to roll around. So again, probably those guidelines are the 2 fingers. We want to have it certainly not tight, but having it roll around is going to pull the cheek pieces up towards the eyes, which we also don't want to have happen. So it needs to be stable. I found
the ones with the connection that comes more around the jaw.
Yes,
that seems to keep it away from the eye, rather than it
aids that stability.
Yeah, so that mine has that as well, and it's actually quite loose, the current one on his nose, but because it's stabilized by the cheek strap, I guess you call it.
It's that lower throat latch.
It's much lower throat latch, and then it really also sits it away from his TMJ as well, and the buckles are protected by leather too, so he doesn't have buckles on his face either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, keeping that TMJ and the ears clear are just so, so many bridles probably need the full size crown, but perhaps cob cheek pieces because the buckles all end up around the TMJ and up past the eye, and it's just a comfort level. We really do want those buckles in line with the eye, but well away from it.
Yeah, and there's so many nerves that come out of around that TMJ area that are getting compressed with bridles. And then the fascial connections, like you mentioned, the ears, the fascial connections that run through the entire body from those ears are so important. So the more freedom we can have around the jaw and the ears and the nerves is just going to allow a lot more comfort.
And there are a lot of new bridal designs being manufactured now with, swept away cheek pieces. I'm currently studying a bridal fitting course, so learning more about that all of the time. But that's another area of tack that is really being considered for the horse's comfort and function currently, which is fantastic to see.
When you're talking about the bridal fit too, and talking about especially, I suppose, people use a noseband in a standard bridle, but with a bitless bridle, you need it because without a noseband, obviously, it's simply going to fall away off your horse's head. Yep. What are your thoughts on nosebands? Obviously, you've got your higher noseband that sits above the actual bit piece, and then also the one that goes below and wraps around the horse's mouth. What are your thoughts on nosebands, or even a couple of points to make sure that your noseband fits now that we have an international metric with the bit fitting devices? Do you have any comments on that?
I often find I'll always ask for clients to take a flash noseband off in a bit fitting and just keep the cavesson so that I can see exactly what's going on in the mouth. And as a general rule, I find that once we have a bit that they're comfortable in, they probably don't need to replace the flash. I see a lot of cavessons too loose and flashes too tight, which then pulls the cavesson down and forward and increases pressure on the crown of the bridle. So look, I'm not a massive fan of the flash noseband. Absolutely a cavesson. And look, I ride with a cavesson because I have horses with generous heads. So, I kind of don't like that open-faced look on them. The grackle is an excellent noseband to use for that faster work because it is sort of away from all of those nerves coming out below the facial crest, etc. So they sit really well for a horse doing fast work, show jumping, cross country. I think they're my preference over a flash, and it allows the nostrils to still fully dilate for that fast work also. Can
you just explain the grackle? I'm not familiar
with... The grackle's sometimes called a figure eight. So it's got it's the two crossover noseband, and the cross part of it will be sort of halfway up the horse's nose above the facial crest. So then it affixes sort of, again, in front of the bit, but also behind, like around the back of the cheek.
So it doesn't kind of it's not closing the mouth as much, is that?
Not as much, but
holding the mouth closed.
Yeah, it's a much more stable, it's a much more stable looking piece of equipment than a flash for that going cross country.
I'm not pulling down as much.
No, that's right. Yeah.
With the pole.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've always thought, are we should nosebands just be aesthetic? How many are actually functional, and are they just hiding improper, bit fit or comfort?
Well, it's hard buy a bridle without a flash on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Kind of how they come. And I mean, I grew up in the 80s, so everything had a tom thumb, single joint tom thumb, and a drop noseband done up as tight as you could. So, you know, and arguably neither of those fitted either. In fact, I know they didn't. But you know, I think the flash is used. And look, most flashes I don't see a lot of over tight flashes, but I do see them tighter than the cavesson, and if anything, it should be the cavesson that's snug and the flash that's loose. Obviously, the cavesson tightened within that 2-finger limit, but you know, you see the in an ill-fitting one, you see the cavesson really pulled down the horse's face by the flash, and that's just not fitting at all.
Yeah, that's really good to know.
Yeah. So talking about, you know, bits that, you know, people can use, are there any that you personally believe are a really strong no-go? You know, they're not bits that should be used in general across the industry, or at least, you know, ones that you think absolutely shouldn't be popping up in a certain discipline? Do you have any thoughts?
Look, there are very strong bits around. I think more to the point, there are bits that shouldn't be used by combinations. So, you know, you look at something like a Waterford bit, which is the one that sort of looks like a whole series of balls.
Oh, yeah.
It's highly, highly mobile. In some instances, that is an incredibly well-functioning bit, particularly for a high-level combination where there might be a power to weight imbalance, you know, a big, strong-going horse and a tiny dot of a rider, you know, and I'm talking sort of 3-star eventing and above. And it means that that rider can have a say without having to haul on the horse's face. Should it be in a grade 4 pony club combination? Absolutely not. You know, and obviously it's not legal for that organisation, but you know, it is really that the bit is as strong as the hands that are on the other end of it, and I think we need to have more people educated and understanding how bits work in a horse's mouth. You know, obviously we look at, you know, some of those, there are some awful bits that are, you know, not legal for any discipline, and absolutely they should all be put in the bin. If you ever want to have a look at a House of Horrors, go and have a look at some barrel racing bits. That's makes your eyes go wide. You know, that barrel racers would probably argue that gives them the ability to fine tune the horse without having to pull on them. I'm not a massive fan of things like running gags, where the horse, where the leverage has no end. I don't like, I see it a little bit these days with running martingales affixed halfway down the horse's neck, and that literally creates a pulley system, that the horse, it doesn't matter where the horse puts its head, it doesn't get a release. So things where horses don't get a release regardless of what they do are things that I'm pretty much put all of those in the bin.
That's a great point.
Just not fair. Yeah. You know, we need to train with fairness. We need the horse to do the right thing and go, oh, that's where I need to go. Have a release for it.
Can you just explain, before we start to wrap up, but can you just explain, because obviously there's a mountain of bits, but you know, there's different functions.
Yep.
Obviously there's a mountain of different functions, but can you just maybe explain some of the main differences in function of bits?
Yep.
Yeah, just
So,
a broad kind of overview. I know there's lots of intricacies, but
so in what we would consider a direct action snaffle, so a bit without leverage, they act on the tongue, lips, bars, and palate, and in some instances the palate. But each bit will have varying levels of pressure in those areas. So, you've got quite a strong section of bits that would claim they offer tongue relief these days, because that's what we've discovered we need to give relief to the tongue. There are bars that specifically designed to offer bar relief, bits that will only apply tongue pressure. So really, when we look at, a whole pile of bits, they're all operating in a different levels of strength in each of those areas. So you've got mouthpieces, and then most mouthpieces come in a range of cheekpieces also, which will again slightly change the function of that mouthpiece. And you may, you've also, when you're considering different mouthpieces and cheekpieces for the horse, you also have to consider the horse and the current rider as a combination. So, if I bit fit a horse for their rider and their coach is there and wants to jump on, I may fit the horse slightly different for the coach, who is probably at a higher level. But I have to bit fit the horse for the horse and rider combination, who the rider that's most on them. Sometimes the coach might, if the coach only has one ride a week, they might have to cop what we've popped in for the rider. So, and it is really easy to look at a whole bunch of bits and go, they all look so different, and why do we have all these? And it is because we can now make really, really little changes. And that really, really counts to the horse.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're so much more sensitive than we.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, you look at all of the nerves that are in the mouth.
Yeah, it's so innervated.
It's so many nerves, it's so vascular. It's yeah, and we're popping, any old piece of metal in there and expecting them to do what we want. Like, we have to just become more. I mean, obviously, I'm a bit fitter. I'm always going to say a horse needs to be bit fitted.
Yeah.
But, it is really, really important that they're comfortable there so that they can do their best for us.
And I did just think of an area where you would want to get your bit refitted.
Yeah.
If you're getting body work on your horse and you're working towards a postural change, and so you've bought the horse or you're starting the horse and it has a certain way of holding itself, a certain way of going, and then you're working on postural function, stability, improving that way of going. And I don't know, because there's no studies kind of probably done in this, but my thought process would be that, if we change the way that horse is using its body, it may then require a different bit because it's going in a completely different.
Absolutely.
Using the biomechanics really differently now.
Yeah. And obviously, if we're changing the way they're moving, they're going to potentially be gaining strength in an area where they've been weak, and they may not require as much support in the mouth, or they may require more or little, but that is another way that the horse is if the horse is actively changing its way of going, we may need to revisit it.
Which is no different to changing up the levels, but with a different focus, on
absolutely. They're working differently.
Yeah. Awesome. Sophie, did you have any last takeaways or questions?
I definitely have a couple of takeaways, because that was a fantastic group of information, really. So my takeaways coming out of that are really that if you are going out to your horse, you can, there's a few points there that you can use to kind of assess whether or not your horse enjoys having their bit in their mouth. And those distinctions being, does my horse open up through the neck and have a soft eye and face while they're wearing their bit? And are they really quite willing to have it in their mouth? And a sign that you might want to have a bit fit, if you haven't had one done yet, is, does my horse try to escape the bit? So push through, pop their tongue over, or, dip behind the vertical, tip my head. Are they grinding their teeth or producing excessive saliva as well? And do I need to use a drop noseband or a flash to stop them from gaping their mouth? I think that's a really big one. Do I need to use this tool or not? Do they open their mouth? So if you are wearing one, maybe you could take it off and see what happens, and just see what kind of response your horse has. Another takeaway would be that you talk about bit fitting in a holistic system. So it's not an answer, it's part of the answer. It's a very important part of the horse's anatomy, their mouth and their tongue, particularly the connection to the hind leg, and making sure that you've met all their other needs, their posture, their ability to move well through their neck and their head, and their dentistry as well, making sure that that's been, kept up to date and is adequate. Also, I would say, your comments, the horses change the fact that they can move straight. When you've had a distinct change from a poor bit maybe to one that fits them better, or they're willing to stand still, those are really valuable. And I would say in terms of, the fact that it's very important for people to know if I'm going to change my discipline or I want to move up the levels within my discipline, it's time for a recheck. And it's a good idea to have a professional give me some advice on what I'm going to put in my horse's mouth so that I can talk to them very clearly and effectively in a kind way, as they work with me. Did you have any in particular, Raquel, that stood out?
Well, you just took them all. You had mine. So I'll come back to it in a second. But Fiona, I just wanted to check, do you have anything else that you would like to add for, for people, like takeaways or anything that we haven't talked about that you really wanted to make sure that people are aware of?
I guess the biggest thing I see out there is bit sizing. Just because your horse is big does not mean it needs a big bit. And a lot of us grew up with the rule of you need to put your little finger in between the horse's lips and the cheek piece of the bit. The only bit that is still true for is a single joint bit because of the way that closes up in the mouth. It forms a V shape, not a U shape. Anything else with a fixed cheek piece, like an egg butt or a D or a bowsher, we want it to sit nice and snug. With a loose ring, we only want sort of 2 to 4 mil each side, so that we don't have that lateral movement or that noise in the horse's mouth. And if you look at most of the modern loose ring bits, they all have a really generous bevel as well. So, I'm regularly fitting warm bloods over 16 hands in 4.5, 4 3/4 inch bits because they are so small from the facial crest down, which does create a whole lot of other issues because they've still got the same amount of stuff to fit in. But so really check the sizing of your bit because too big and it's just swimming around there and creating noise that the horse doesn't really need to hear.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
About, could you, because this is something I see all the time mentioned in BitFit, could you talk about looking at wrinkles? What's your, the little wrinkles on the side?
Yeah.
That's like, I feel like that's something I was told as like a 10-year-old, do it up until you see this many wrinkles. What are your thoughts? Yeah. Is it the individual? There is a metric?
Look, the 2 wrinkles is not a bad basic rule of thumb, but it does have to be in relation to the horse's anatomy. So a horse with a really long smile, if you go for the 2 wrinkles, you've almost put it on the premolar and they're not going to be happy. A horse with a short smile, you kind of have to be careful, particularly with the geldings, that you've not got it too close to the upper canine tooth. So it is on an individual basis, but really just being aware of your horse's anatomy. And a horse with really fleshy lips is going to have that 2 wrinkles come up really quick. It's hardly a scientific thing, but I tend to go by, I want a little bit of movement in the cheek piece and of the bridle. I don't want to pick up the rein and have the bit have to lift and then have the cheek pieces flapping around. We want it just hanging there with that sort of neutral pressure. Yeah, but that's a really good one because it's not a hard and fast rule, because we've got all sorts of different breeds and anatomy styles of horses that we're bitting.
Yeah. I've definitely learned something today too. Yeah, there was lots of points.
Excellent.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yes, I think my takeaways would be that, yeah, we do have to consider that individual anatomy and how important that is, and also the individual discipline, training level, rider experience, and just, that whole package there. Each horse individually, rather than just going, they're doing this, all horses that do this go in this bit kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also, that difference of the cheek pieces with the size, and how different cheek pieces that, you need a little more space or a little bit less space. I think, again, that just highlights that individual nature of bit fitting.
Yeah.
And I would just highlight the value and the importance. I've had, quite a few clients now have their bits fitted, and it really helps the horse's comfort. It makes it more pleasant for the rider. It should be a part of horse care to get it done at least once, and then, get it done again if like you said, you're doing a different discipline, you're changing training levels, or your horse has changed their biomechanics and posture significantly. So, yes, thank you so much for coming on. It was such
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was an awesome discussion. I think people are going to find this podcast very valuable, because it is something, like, I know we've got listeners in other parts of the world as well, but it is something that, has been a bit slower to grow in Australia, and we still have a very limited number of bit fitters. So it's an area that we need more people qualified in, and with a general biomechanics knowledge, because that's, really goes hand in hand, like having coaches or body workers, people with anatomical biomechanical knowledge, bit fitting. I know there's dentists that bit fit as well, and that can be valuable, but they need to have done extra training in biomechanics specifically, I think. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler, Fiona Dearing, and Sophie Vandenberg in today's podcast. Enjoy your horse time. Please subscribe to the Equine Functional Posture podcast so you don't miss our weekly episodes, and give us a 5-star rating so we can share more valuable insights.
Yes. And before we disappear, Fiona, could you just tell us where people can learn more about you?
My business is called Bitrite Equine, and I've got a Facebook and Insta page, so you can just search those. There is a website coming, but time. So Facebook or Insta for Bitrite Equine is the easiest way to get hold of me.
And that doesn't have your name on it, Fiona Dearing. It just says Bitrite Equine.
Bitrite Equine. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everyone.